Welcome, one and all, to the world's finest show. I'm Kyle Hudson,
And I'm Ray Gordon.
and you've probably noticed we haven't put out a show in about a month, and a lot has happened. And it's not because we didn't want to talk about it, but we did want to take some time and figure out how we wanted to talk about it. And as you know, we've been doing the show for like 8 years almost now, and so we've approached this topic before, but as you probably know, we used to broadcast from a pretty conservative talk radio station. So I always felt that we shouldn't talk about it directly, but through a pop culture lens. And I realized that that was probably a wrong decision to make. I feel like we do have a duty to talk about these things when they happen. And so today we're going to take that opportunity. We're going to pretty much spend the whole episode talking with about Black Lives Matter and the situations going on in our country. In the second half of our show, we're going to be interviewing Nydea Graves, the newest council member out in Coatesville, who I had the privilege of working with at a Black Lives Matter march I attended, and who also happens to be a friend of Ray, which just came up in conversation at the end of the thing. So we will have her on later. But I guess, Ray, with everything that's going on in the world, we've talked about this, before. What's different now, do you think?
I feel like the biggest difference in this current climate of our country is the fact that we're in the middle of not just one, not two, but three crises, all happening congruently. There's the economic crisis, which was beset by the pandemic crisis, and those two things exacerbated the police brutality crisis that seems to be affecting our nation as a whole, hence the uprisings and the marches and the riots. I feel like the difference between earlier when we broached this topic of conversation and now is that we have had to be in the house for 3 months reflecting.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, we haven't had the opportunity to out of sight, out of mind, a lot of these topics that are up for daily discussion. And if it can't be hidden and if it can't be ran away from, it must be confronted. And I feel like the nation is attempting to confront an issue that it has done its best not to for the foreseeable past.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the questions a lot of people who are just tuning in are asking, is this something that has gotten worse, or was it always this bad and we're just learning about it now because everyone has a camera in their pocket? Do you know what I mean? Like, what do you think? I mean, because I'll be honest, I've been, paying attention to this stuff, but I'll be honest, until recently, I didn't even think about a lot of the stuff that I know you've told me you think about quite often. So what do you think? Is it a worse or just the same?
I believe that things have grown and evolved. As far as worse and better, I think those are subjective terms. I feel as if that things have evolved to the point where now they're able to be discussed at length and not just in private forums. Now it's a public matter of discussion. This upcoming election is going to be dictated by a lot of the occurrences that have happened over the past 2 years. A very brief sample size of our country's history, but it seems like all the archetypes that have been the founding elements of our country have all been microcosms into the past 2 years. Everything from racism to religion, everything from politics and governmental trust to poverty and just the basic human right of living in a house with clean water, clean food. We have to realize that they're only going to be better for our children. But for us, it's a reality.
Well, and it's not just going to happen on its own. And that's, the thing I've been trying to impart to people is like, I mean, yeah, I mean, I've had plenty of my friends, white people, who tell me, you know, I'm not racist. I agree with them. I'm like, okay, so what are you doing about it? You know what I mean? Like, it's wishful thinking has gotten us this far, right?
Right.
So we actually have to take action. And, you know, participating in that Black Lives Matter march was an incredibly powerful experience. And, you know, we'll talk about it later with Nydea, but, you know, just seeing how people, like, the raw emotion and listening to people speak, and like telling their truths. And as a white guy, you know, like, it's so outside of my daily experience. And I think a lot of people just need to listen to what's being said. You know what I mean? Because it's, a lot of people are just, they're telling you the truth. You just need to listen, and it's uncomfortable sometimes. But you still, where they're coming from is their truth. And I think, to you said, like, we're starting this conversation, but I know for a lot of white folks it's very uncomfortable.
What was it like? What was your experience like as a Caucasian male at a Black Lives Matter event? Like, can you describe to me like the cacophony of emotions that filled you throughout the day?
I mean, I guess the one word I would use is like educational, right? Like, I learned, and because, see, I think I'm a pretty, I hate the term woke, I hate it. But you know what I mean? Like, I thought I was pretty open-minded, you know what I mean? That I've, you know, I try and expose myself to things. But, you know, you can watch movies about it and you can watch TV shows and stuff, but, like, hearing real people, and, like, it's, you know, as a white guy who's like, my family never owned slaves, you know what I mean? Like, it's really easy to say and just write it off and be like, I don't have a part in this, right? Like, but you start realizing that there's, like, a lot of other things that you benefit from that you don't
Mm,
necessarily like just that you're given the benefit of the doubt. Do you know what I mean? Like, sometimes on some things that it's stuff that, like, I never have to worry about, did something happen to me because I was white? Do you know what I mean? Like, and I think
right.
when they use the term white privilege, it's like a misnomer. Do you know what I mean? Like, well, the privilege is it doesn't feel like privilege when you're experiencing it. It just feels like normal. Do you know what I
Mm,
mean? And then when your eyes kind of get open, it's like the cave, you know, like Plato's The Cave. Like, when you go outside the cave and you see the real thing and you try and go back and tell the people about the shadows, they're like, dude, I see the truth. It's right in front of me. And
right.
so it was a very, I still have a hard time articulating it. I really do. And the people I interacted with were all very open and talking to me about things. And I realize that that's not anyone's job, you know, to educate anyone. It's not your responsibility to educate me. But if you want to, you got to be open to it. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what I encourage other white folks at this moment to just, like, listen to what people are saying, because there is a real problem. and and even if you don't experience it, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not there. That's actually kind of the point people are trying to make, it seems. um and I mean, like, for you as, like, a black guy, I mean, you like, what have you seen? How has your life changed in these last couple weeks since the murder of George Floyd? I mean, have you felt that society is treating you differently, or, like, what has that been like?
Well, first, thank you for opening up the door for that very personal reflection that you allow me to have. My life hasn't changed at all. I think I don't want to call it a terrifying reality. I want to call it an overwhelming experience it is to be Black in America, and to have to explain to people the reasoning behind something as simple or as perceivably simple as Black Lives Matter. I've gotten conversations from random people of all different ethnicities. And some of the strangest questions I've heard, because there's no such thing as a stupid question. One of the strangest questions I heard was actually recently. I was asked from a Caucasian individual, what type of white privilege do I have? And put in conversation like that is there's an interesting divide between the residents of our country, depending on background, religion, upbringing, all these things. But the overarching issue is that a lot of people just don't understand why Black Lives Matter. Like, I understand that they understand the term in its essence, like the language equivalent, the very barest essence of Black Lives Matter. Well, they don't understand why. It's like seeing the forest through the trees. Like, most people will just be like, oh, wow, look at all the trees. But really, wow, that's a forest, that's a jungle, and there are two different things. My life has not changed at all because I can't turn off being Black. I can't take a break from it. I wish I could. I tried to leave the country and experience a different reality. I was treated as an American who just so happened to be Black. I think that was one of the first times I got to feel like a human being without having to justify it. But when I came back to the country and just tried to hold a conversation with my neighbors, with my fellow countrymen, it was hard. It was really hard breaking through the reality that I'm always going to be viewed as Black, not as an American first, not as a man first, but Black first. And when that realization thunderstruck me, it also made clear why things like Black Lives Matter exist. Is to remind people that even if the humans don't come from the same pool you came from, or the same area you came from, or the same paradigm you came from, doesn't make them any less human. So when you ask me how does it change me over the past couple weeks since George Floyd died, I say to you, it doesn't change me any much more than it changed me when Sandra Bland died. It didn't change me any much more than it changed me when Trayvon Martin died. It didn't change me any much more than it changed me when Tamir Rice. Like, there's so many names, so many human lives that have to have justification. They have to have a reason to be cared about. So Black Lives Matter means, like, this whole experience has shown me that it's going to take a while for everyone to accept that all lives, including Black lives, are equal.
And I will say this, you bring up the other names, and there are a lot of other names. And I think a question myself and a lot of other white folks are asking ourselves are like, why now? You know what I mean? Like, why? And I don't have an answer for you. I really don't, right? Like, we had a Black Lives Matter march in Westchester, and the mother of Bianca Roberson spoke, who was shot on, it was like a road rage incident that was, very racially motivated. She was literally shot while she was driving her car on the local road, like right down the street from us. And her mom was like, how come where were all you guys? I'm glad to see you now, but where were you all when my daughter died? Mm-hmm. And I don't have a good answer for that. And so I think, when if you see a couple white people throwing themselves into this really hard, I think that's where that's coming from. Do you know what I mean? There is a guilt that is, I think a lot of people are feeling that, especially people who like the I'm not racist people. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it's like, well, okay, but what did you do to prevent things in your community from happening, right? And because it is something that, you know, liberty and freedoms and all this stuff needs to be maintained, right? You have to constantly be fighting for it. I wrote a piece that was printed in the local paper, and in it I said that, like, the civil rights movement wasn't like a thing that happened and then it was over. It's like something that's continuing to happen. And you know, I think one of the things that is probably one of the biggest highlights that you see in the media is the protests that are turning into riots, and, you know, because that makes good TV, right? That makes people, that's the clicks. Well, you recently moved to Philadelphia, and the riots or whatever have been happening right outside your door. What's that like, and how do you feel about, like, that as a tactic? And I want to acknowledge real quick, I want to acknowledge that protesters and rioters are two different groups of people. I do want to acknowledge that I'm not conflating the two. I do realize that usually looters and rioters subvert the cause that the protesters come out and do, and cause as a distraction. So I just want to clarify that.
Right. I feel like living through it and reading about it are definitely two different things. It was all fun and games until around 2:15, 2:18 in the morning. Me and my fiance were woken up to a tremendous explosion. And it wasn't until the day after that we realized that people were using dynamite to get into ATMs. It's been a eye-opening experience. I can't say that I'm afraid, but there is fear in the air. I am not a part of it, but I live amongst it. It's just a lot of anger and sadness. A lot of anger and sadness just spilled out onto the streets. It didn't help that people were stuck inside for 3 months. It did not help at all. But living through it, I'm realizing, and especially with the ebbs and flows of it, the ups and downs of it, like we had a tumultuous week of protests and riots, and then it just seemed like not a week and a half, 2 weeks, like afterwards, things have sort of simmered down a bit. Like people are back onto the coronavirus thing over the riots thing. It's almost like the news turned the page, and then we as a country turned the page with it, because now it's all about stimulus package and what are we gonna do? Are we gonna stay green, or is it gonna go yellow, or straight back to red? So I feel like this was the result of people not being able to provide for their families.
Oh, I definitely think that's without a doubt one of the reasons why you see so many people, because they can, right? They can. I just wanted to relate to you. I don't know if you've ever seen this movie, but probably the first time I was ever made aware of, I mean, like, because I grew up pretty sheltered, you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't raised in the most progressive kind of family. And I remember I worked at Blockbuster, and I rented the movie Do the Right Thing. So it's by Spike Lee, and it was like his first film or something like that. And it's about, like, the hottest day in the summer. Samuel L. Jackson plays the radio host. Unbelievable. Yes. And spoiler warning, but it's pretty well known at this point. You know, it's from 1989. Now, in the end, it culminates with the police murdering Radio Raheem, who's this guy who the whole movie has been walking around with a boombox playing "Fight the Power" by what's it? Run
DMC, NWA.
Not an NWA. Terminator X, Flava Flav. Public Enemy.
Public Enemy, yes.
Public Enemy. So anyway, they kill Radio Raheem, and a mob starts to form outside of the pizza restaurant, the Korean restaurant. The whole thing takes place on a block. And it starts to really bubble up. And Mookie, the main character, played by Spike Lee, picks up a trash can and throws it through the window. He screams, "Hey!" Throws it through the window of the pizzeria, and a riot ensues that burns the pizzeria to the ground. And I always thought, watching that movie as a kid up until very recently, I believe that the reason why Mookie did that was because he wanted to protect Sal and his sons, right? He saw the danger coming, and so he decided, well, I'd rather destroy property than lose lives. And so it was a heroic act that he did to save the lives of his boss. And I recently saw an interview with Spike Lee, and he was like, they asked him why Mookie threw the trash can through the window. And he's like, it's interesting because only white people ask me that question. Every black person knows why he threw that. He didn't give a crap about Sal. He just saw his friend murdered right in front of his eyes, and he was pissed off. And that was the only recourse he had. It was the only outlet he had to do that. And that floored me. That really floored me. Because again, it's like the perception, right? Like, it's just so outside of my worldview to understand what was going on that I see it through my lens. You know what I mean? I see it how I put myself in the story, but that wasn't my story. Do you know what I mean?
And I feel like that's a big thing now. It's seeing a lot of people sort of try to live vicariously through the protesters and live vicariously through the movement that's happening right before our very eyes, just to be a part of it, not with any meaning, but superficially a part of the movement. I feel like that's an unfortunate happening, an unfortunate reality that comes with a time of change like it is right now. Riots and looters, rioters and looters take away from the protesters and the demonstrators who actually plan things out. And it really subverts the message. I want everybody, whoever gets to watch this, to be very, very clear that it's not about violence. This is a movement about love. It was never supposed to be violent. That's why they knelt. It was never supposed to be violent. That's why they marched. It was never supposed to be violent. That's why they prayed. There's a lot. If you don't think that the civil rights movement didn't just move to the churches, I'd like to inform you that it did. That nothing has truly changed until we change ourselves. And I'm noticing by walking amongst my people out here that we got a lot of room to grow.
And I would say to white folks that want to help as a fellow white person, I know it can be very tempting to want to jump into a leadership role in something like this because you just want to go and make amends and show the world that you're not racist, right? But I've always believed that, if you really want to help, a community outside of your own, you need to be there to push the bus, not drive the bus. Do you know what I mean? Like, you have to be there to support, not direct, because again, that goes back to the listening thing, right? Like when a group of people say, I'm being affected by something and this is how I think it needs to change. And then you're like, well, I don't know. I think maybe it should be changed this way. It's like, well, right. You're not the one experiencing it. So listen and try and consider it and maybe support their efforts to achieve the goals that they're trying. And I think that's any group where you're trying to show support for a group that's not your own because you care, and that's great to do. But I also think that white people are not used to being told they can't be a part of something or they can't do something. And so I think that's where there's a little bit of frustration born out from some of those people who have the best of intentions, but maybe go about it the wrong way.
I can understand that. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to how to involve an ally. And I feel like a lot of that is built off of the fact that we have never really been in this position before. We've never really been in a position where we can talk without the fear of repercussion, because that doesn't exist for certain select groups of people in this country. But that's never been that way for Caucasian Americans in this country. Caucasian Americans can do whatever they want. Like the life is different. When I asked some select groups of my friends, like, what do you do when you see a cop behind you and like they got their lights on? They go, oh, just pull over, or I'll let him go. And if he wants to stop and talk to me, we sit around and talk. I was like, yeah, when I see lights on, my stomach drops into the pit of my chest, to the pit of my body. It just drops all the way down. I don't know what, but I do realize one very important thing. If I make the wrong move, I could be a news clip. And just that paradigm shift from people who are supposed to protect and serve goes to reason as to why people are asking for police reform. And some people are even going as far as defunding the police. Some people are going as far as abolishing the police. And I just feel as if we need to have that safe space in order to hold these conversations. Because the more we're able to talk across our comfort lines with people who don't understand to their bones, but who want to know better for the future. If we can get that space, I feel like that would improve our communication, improve our livability within America by leaps and bounds. Communication stops wars.
Well, one of the things that I did learn at the march was that, you know, the like you said, the paradigm shift, right? Like how you feel uncomfortable and stuff like that. That if you truly are one of the people that want like equality and you want everyone to feel the same way you do, that is going to also involve you probably being uncomfortable. It's going to involve you probably having uncomfortable conversations with people who you know and love. I have done that recently myself. It's been difficult, but you can't, like, we've reached a point where like letting it slide is like, we can't do that anymore, right? Like for a long time, it was just like, all right, well, you know, well, this is a Black people problem, right? But it isn't. It's an American problem that we all have to deal with, and we as white people have an equal share in this responsibility in this conversation. And I feel like a lot of us have just not wanted to have that conversation because it's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable as a white person. It's uncomfortable when you realize that you are treated differently. Like it's uncomfortable to realize that when I am treated differently at stores, like every interaction in my life, differently than you are. I mean, that's a fact. I mean, and I think that's interesting that this is like our first one doing videos, like people can see us. We look very different.
Right.
And that, like, when you realize that, that's uncomfortable to come to terms with. And a lot of white people, like you said, we don't have to deal with it if we don't want to. We can just shrug it off, and because to us, our life is normal, right? And as the more you learn, the more you realize, like, you can watch Mercy, you can watch these things on TV, but you need to listen to people who are actually living it. You know what I mean? Like, if you watched Hidden Figures and you were like, oh wow, that's such an inspiring movie, then question how come it isn't still, like, why are we still not being taught these women's names in school today?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
why does it take an HBO show for people to know about Tulsa, Oklahoma, the first bombing on American soil?
And we talked about that. When we talked about that, that was, you know, we that was a conversation we had. How I'm a history guy. How did I not hear about that until I was seeing it in The Watchmen? You know what I mean? And I just feel like it's the more, if you just open up your eyes, you will see that the system has failed. It's failed all of us, honestly. I mean, it's failed you far more than it's failed me, but it honestly has failed all of us. But I do tell people this, that, like, you know, it is true that none of us are actually responsible. No one alive is responsible for the problems we're facing. But that doesn't mean we can't be the ones who fix it. And I'm not saying we fix racism in a day or maybe even a generation, but if we do our jobs right, like you said, our kids won't have to deal with this, right? Like let's let's bear the uncomfort. Let's put it on our backs so that our children never have to deal with this stuff. Because I think it's possible eventually. Do you know what I mean? But we're going to have to start looking at things totally differently.
Like the fact that we have to explain, like that people who are, bastions of the Black Lives Movement, they say it's crazy how our motto is Black Lives Matter, and we're really met with responses like, yeah, but. It's like, what do you mean, but? Like, that's the whole thing. It's like, but what? That's the whole thing. It should be something that, but we like to be contrarians in this country, and actually all over the world, but I'm trying to keep it in America. We like to sort of like have that devil's advocacy in pretty much every aspect of our life. Like, regardless of what the mission is or the message, there's always going to be a question that dilutes the message.
Oh, I agree that, but I also think Americans have been able to do crazy things before. Do you know what I mean? Like, America, when we put our mind to things, we can do them, right? We just all have to get on the same page. First, we all have to get on the page that there's a problem.
Right.
And I'm glad to say that at least that is the one thing, correct me if I'm wrong, that is the one thing I do start to see some movement on. Yes. Is that the acknowledgement of the problem is there. We're still going to have a lot of fighting about solutions. Right. But I think a lot more people are open to the idea that like that your life and my life are different. And that's not okay. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I don't know. What would you say to someone who wants to be an ally? What can we do to be supportive in these times, right? Like, I know we have sometimes a problem of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Mm-hmm. I feel like what can be done is just support a local movement, be it through financial means or be it through networking means, because a lot of these movements are just two sponsors, two donors away from being palpable, from being a physical entity that just goes, from being an engine. But they're hamstrung by a lack of resources. They're hamstrung by a lack of the right listening ears. So networking, financial compensation, something that's more than just a hope and a prayer, because a lot of people don't even have that.
That is actually an excellent segue into our next segment. After the break, we are going to be joined by Coatesville, Pennsylvania's newest council member, Nydea Graves. I met them at the Black Lives Matter march I attended. They also happen to be a friend of Ray, which was a awesome happenstance. So stay tuned, and we'll be back with them right after this. Welcome back to the World's Finest Show. I'm Kyle Hudson.
And I'm Ray Gordon.
And we have a very special guest with us today. It's kind of interesting. I met our next guest at an event I participated in a couple weeks ago, and I was like, hey, you should come on my show. And she's like, my friend has a show. And I'm like, oh, who's your friend? She's like, Ray Gordon. So I real quick, I'll give you an introduction. Her name is Nydea Graves. She's the newly elected councilperson at large in Coatesville, Pennsylvania. She's also the field organizer of Chester County Stands Up. How are you, Nydea?
Hey, how are you, Kyle? How are you, Ray?
Oh, fantastic.
Super excited for you guys to have me here.
Glad to have you back.
And thank you for spending some time. I know with your busy schedule, just getting elected, just being around and seeing the city and having all of that praise heaped on you, it has to have been an overwhelming experience.
Yeah, I would say that honestly, it's been kind of a whirlwind. Like I said, I started community organizing in 2018, where I like ran for committee person, and I'm like, I will only work on other people's campaigns. I will never run for office. But honestly, you know, you gotta, once you feel like you're the best person for the job, it just naturally pushes you into that kind of leadership.
That is a very astute answer. What was it about? What was the moment that you decided to step off of the sidelines and enter the fray?
Oh, okay. So this is actually a story that I am practicing in my trainings, because also I'm learning how to be a trainer for other organizers. This is the story that I'm practicing for my training, so I'm glad that I get to tell it, because tomorrow is when I do my practice. So I went to Chicago last year for leadership training. It was a week-long training, and it ended up being quite transformative. Everything that happened since that training has truly been pushing me into this moment. But I was in a leadership training in Chicago last year, and I got offered to run for city council. They were looking for a council person to run in the ward that I lived in, which is the 3rd ward. And I was like, no, my neighbor, I mean, the wards here are small, so, and being the council person that lives there, I'm like, I'm not running against my neighbor. And I did not. After the primary came and went, she was the Democratic nominee, and I went to Chicago, and it was like July, the end of July, beginning of August was the week. And I was in this training, and the training was really intense. And it had been said that I did not step into power unless I was called. And I wasn't called in this particular activity. So I was really pissed off about it. I was really pissed off at the trainer. And I was pissed off all week because I felt like I had this virtuous spin of like, I don't want to run against my neighbor, but I wasn't even connecting it to city council yet. It was on the last day of the 7 days that I was realizing that this like virtue thing that I was having was really stopping me from gaining the power that I needed to transform the lives of people all across the nation. Because when I was in Chicago, I was with a ton of people. So transform lives in Coatesville, in Pennsylvania, and ultimately all across the nation. The things that I need to fight for are things like Medicare for all, things like prison abolition, things like housing as a human right, things like New Green Deal to protect our people and our planet. And the discomfort that I was going to feel with having, with running against my neighbor was so insignificant compared to the things that I need the power to change. So I decided I was going to run for a 3rd ward seat for city council. And so I did that. I lost. I got about a third of the vote, but I ran a write-in campaign against an incumbent Democrat, which I was very glad I didn't have to do that again this time. In this time, I had the clarity of why I was running, why I needed to win. And ultimately, I kept reminding myself of the things that I was fighting for, how it was tied to my liberation and those around me. And ultimately won. And several things happened that really, the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, I did not take that well at all. Like I said, I'm a field organizer. I can knock doors all day. And I think the ward where I got to knock doors, the 3rd ward, which I live in, I got close to 90% of the vote because I live here and I could knock doors here, compared to the rest of the city where it was about 60 or 70%. So, I mean, I'm a field organizer and I can't go to people's doors, and now I'm phone banking, and I was having a really hard time. There was an economic crisis, and I'm like, people are in the middle of the economic crisis. How can I fundraise right now?
Yeah, how do you ask people for money when the world is melting down around them?
Yeah, we had a fundraiser. It was a joint fundraiser from some of the organizers that was that were with me running for office in Chicago. They were actually trainers because they had been to that training before. And we made about $4,000. We split it in thirds, and we all went on to win our seats.
That's
so
awesome.
That's myself, Nikhil Savell in PA District 1, and Rick Grajewski in PA 188 for state rep.
That's awesome. So wait, so in addition to politics though, and you, when we spoke, when I met you, you told me there was like two kinds of politics, right? There's like electoral politics and social politics.
And issue politics.
Issue politics. So that's like your electoral politics background, but you also do issue politics with Chester County Stands Up. Tell us a little bit about that organization.
Sure. So we are a part of a larger group called Pennsylvania Stands Up. And so Pennsylvania Stands Up is a group that is really working on connecting rural Pennsylvania with urban and suburban Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania is so different all across it. So, right, Trump won by about 44,000 votes here in PA. And a lot of our rural constituents get left behind by both political parties. It's very, there's a lot of economic anxiety in rural life, the same way there is in urban lives and communities, like poor communities of color, like how I've come from. And Pennsylvania Stands Up mission is really just bridge that and realize that this larger system of capitalism is what is causing both of us to suffer under its weight. And I think a lot of times we aren't organizing our rural folks because we assume that we can't. You know, people call them nasty names like deplorable. So.
Now, I've always agreed that, like, I don't know, you got to meet people where they are. Do you know what I mean? Like, you got to meet people where they are. And sometimes people aren't where you are, but they still want to get to where you want to go. So you have to sometimes work outside of your wheelhouse. You know what I mean? Like, step outside of your comfort zone if you really want to, you know, if you want to win a war, you got to raise an army, right?
Yeah. And Coatesville's very like edge of suburbs. If you drive 10 minutes west, you're in cornfields. If you drive, 15 minutes east, you're in like a very nice suburb. So, I mean, Chester County in general is just half rural, half suburban. And right, when I say that I want a better world, I'm not just saying a better world for me. I want a better world for all of us. And right, that includes people who live in rural areas. That even includes like people who are ultra conservatives and have different views than I do. I would like a better world.
I was wondering, Nydea, now that you're an elected member of the city council, what is it about Coatesville that is an inspiration? You know, what is it about Coatesville that causes such drive, such meaning for you in order to run?
Yeah, absolutely. So Coatesville is my community. We're so tight-knit here. Everyone knows each other's family. The teachers, my educators in high school went to school with my mother. So Coatesville is such a small and close-knit community, but we have been purposely divested in so much in general by the county. We live in the richest county in Pennsylvania. Let's be very clear that the median income, I believe, is close to $90,000. And if I make $15,000, then I live in a community that has been very divested in. And so, that continued divestment has put us into a place where, now they're reinvesting in Coatesville, but that's because they want to gentrify it. You divest until, you want to reinvest, and the community that has classically lived there, will be pushed out for a community that they deem more acceptable, a better tax base.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is probably the biggest problems, especially in local government, right, is that you are very much an outlier. right? Like, because most of the council jobs and mayor jobs and stuff like that are like, you're paid peanuts. It's not like something, unless you have a lot of free time, you're really passionate, or you have a lot of money and this can just be a hobby for you, you can't really participate. You know what I mean? I tell people all the time, the only reason I have been able to participate in politics is because I've won a game show. You know what I mean? Like, that's not how this should work. Anyone should be able to have access, not just to the ballot box, but to be able to run. And that's why, I mean, when I met you, I was so encouraged by you, because like, our generation, young people, I know it can seem very big, right? It can seem scary and hard to wrap your head around the fact that you can do this. But I mean, how old are you, Nydea, if you don't mind me asking?
Yes, so I'm 27.
I mean, and you're an elected person making decisions in your community. I mean, that just goes to show that, you know, if you're watching this, you can do this. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, not to disparage any of you guys here, but we're not really special, right? Like, we're regular folks just trying to go out and do good things. Now,
and honestly, I think more working class people should run for office. It's what we need. The status quo is not built to serve working class people. That's why we have to step into these positions. We have to step into these offices and demand that, you know, our needs be met and the needs of people in our communities are met, because if not, they'll be ignored like they always have been.
And that's a great segue into how I met you, which was at the Coatesville Black Lives Matter March. We had a mutual friend, Rukia Young. It's weird. We had a mutual friend, Ray.
It's actually pronounced Rukaya.
Rukaya, I apologize. Rukaya, I had met her. I drove her home from work doing rideshare service.
Actually, them.
Them, I'm sorry. And I talked with them, and I was like, look, if you ever need, you know, help, call me up. And they did. And I was invited out to the Black Lives Matter March out in Coatesville, which you were a big part of. And I just wonder if you could share that experience, because it was incredible, and I still have a very hard time in articulating it. And also, after you describe what happened, you know, the message, I learned a lot that day. And if you could just kind of share with us because I think sometimes the message gets lost in the media noise. Do you know what I mean? Like that, if you could break down some of the concepts that Black Lives Matter are putting out there, so that maybe some of our listeners, viewers can understand them a little better.
Sure. So for this march, Kai actually added me to a group, and the group was really big. And because I've done like direct actions before, you know, I'm pretty okay at just planning direct actions. And I'm like, okay, so let me just say like, hey, if we're going to do this thing, we have to make it organized that way it can go off well. Let's just like throw some people into some roles so we can solidify that this goes well. And right, there was some adversity during the whole thing. It was very stressful. You know, I was getting texts about all kinds of threats. I was being told that I was like under investigation, which I was what? And so the whole thing was, you know, caused a lot of tension, but actually have a shot that Antez took. Tez shot it. Please hit him up for these shirts because I believe they're limited edition.
Well, we'll make sure we put a link in the information.
We'll
yes.
drop that.
Yeah, just send it to me. Send it to me.
Okay, cool. Will do. It was amazing. It was so many, I looked back and people were still at the diner, and I was like on Pennsylvania Avenue. So I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. It was a full crowd of people.
Do you know what the count was? Do you know? I found out what the count was. Do you know what the count was?
So Daily Local says 3,000, but that seems like an overshot.
I thought that as well, but then when I thought about it, I think it's closer to the truth. I mean, like you said, It stretched all the way down Lincoln Highway. That's a lot of people. Yeah.
And right, we all marched, and we marched fast too. I'm like, ooh, I don't exercise on a daily basis. So we marched very quickly. We marched to the police station, and we had people just come out and speak and talk about their experience with police brutality, with living as a person of color, with living with their foot under capitalism. And it was wild. And I think the overall message is that this status quo will not work. Look at all of these people who are so upset with how things are going right now.
Yeah, it seems as if the current climate dictates that there needs to be change, there needs to be a youthful vibrance, and there needs to be a willingness to listen.
Well, so here's the thing. We're in the middle of three crises. There is this crisis of police brutality and racialized violence. We're in this crisis of COVID, where our government could have protected us, but let us fall into a pandemic. And also, we're not even set up to be okay in a pandemic. And because of the pandemic, we're in an economic crisis. People are unsure about their next meal, unsure about their rent. I mean, a lot of that stuff has a moratorium on it. But what's going to happen when the moratorium goes off? We're going to have an eviction crisis. And so the overarching crisis is the loss in faith of government. Why should we have faith in government right now when you guys are just letting all of this stuff pile on top of us? I'm sure not everybody thinks that, we're the greatest country in the world, but I'm sure people had some faith that we would at least be okay, oh, we're the best, people thought we would at least be okay. And when we're not, when the chips fell and we weren't okay, it's, people are very upset about that, and rightfully so. So I think people are saying what we have literally doesn't work because they lied. They also lied and told us that it did work for a long time. They lied and said, well, these workers, they don't have a college degree. Why should someone who works the same thing as a high school kid make a living wage? But then when all the chips fall, they're essential workers.
Oh, yeah. The McDonald's people are that were just wanting $15 an hour. That's all they wanted.
Exactly. Now all the people who make society run when society can't run are the minimum wage workers, right? And so now we're like, hold up. Not only do these people need to get paid $15, they should have the highest paying jobs because they are the essential workers. All the CEOs are home and they're safe. They can keep their family safe. Their house is comfortable to be in during a pandemic. They're, not feeling so. I'm not sure what anybody's family stuff is because those could cause you to not be happy in your house. But you have a house that you can be comfortable in. Meanwhile, the rest of the country is in great distress, and
I fear for the people who have to go through certain things like domestic abuse and just that in the house violence, and people who go stir crazy, that cabin fever from not having to live. You tell Americans that you have to not leave the house for 3 months, but then you also want the full rent after 3 months. It seems kind of inhumane, especially in a city like Coatesville that has some of the highest property taxes in the area. It's kind of egregious.
It's very egregious. And the other thing too, right, I was feeling about the pandemic, because I've had a really hard time being stuck in the house. I had a very hard time with it. And I'm like, okay, so we have people in prisons. How can we not be feeling empathy for the folks that are incarcerated right now? How can we think that having folks incarcerated in smaller areas and more confined than what we are, and we're all stir crazy, how can we not feel like that's inhumane?
Because people, the honest answer is people don't think about it. I didn't even think about it until we had that conversation. You told me about it. I'm like, yeah, that makes total sense. But by design, prisons put you out of sight, out of mind, right? That's literally how prisons are designed to work. That's their function. So and I actually give you a lot of credit because I know you guys had a big to do. They released 30% of the prisoners from Chester County prisons.
Yeah. Yeah, we worked, we tweeted, we wrote our representatives, we called and said, hey, you know, this isn't fair. We had a town hall as well. We had an epidemiologist on the line, and truly, they need to decarcerate even more. Very, very appreciative of the 30% that was decarcerated, but we need to go even further, because those people are very vulnerable and they're just sitting ducks.
So real quick, because we are coming to the end of the interview, what are, like, let's say someone's at home and they want to do something, right? And maybe they can't go out because of COVID or something like that. What are some basic things, either A, that they could do, or things that they could advocate for to help progress progress policies so that everyone feels safe in their communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing that you can do is join a local organization that is fighting for abolition. And so abolition is in line with the Black Lives Matter movement. And that is the abolition of police and prisons. So one of the biggest things you can do, I mean, if you can stay home, there's always like Twitter actions or virtual town halls that you can join that your local orgs most likely are having. Pennsylvania Stands Up has the Crisis and Opportunity on Thursday nights. So I will always share those things. If you can, try to run for office, but policies that you should be taking up at this moment to keep everyone safer is, number one, defunding the police.
Can you just break that down? Because I know that gets lost. It's become a charged term. If you could just, you know, we only have a couple minutes left, but if you could just try and synthesize what exactly you mean by that.
So divesting from police departments and investing that money into community is going to take all levels of government to implement this, because, you know, certain officials have certain powers over stuff, but that means investing in anti-poverty initiatives, investing in holistic education, investing in community health. That means Medicare for all, and putting the money back into the community. And that's what makes us safe from crime, because if we're not in poverty, if we have secure housing, if we have secure Medicare, if we have holistic education, we are not participating in activities that may be criminalized because our needs are met. A lot of people say, well, what does it look like? What's the community going to look like when we defund the police? It's going to look like the suburbs. It's going to look like Ty-Different.
So if people want to find out more about you,
defunding schools and defunding,
no. Finish what you gotta say.
We've been defunding our communities for years on end, and that's why we're so divested in.
Oh yeah, I mean, what was it? When Corbett was governor, they were spending more money on prisons than education, and that's not a solution. So if people want to find out more about what you do, and, you know, if they want to, you know, follow your organizations, what are the websites, social media pages, channels that they can follow you at?
Sure. So the Chester County Stands Up website is chestercountystandsup.org. So you can follow Chester County Stands Up at chestercountystandsup.org. And you can follow me on Facebook at Coatesville Councilmember Nydea Graves. And you can follow me on Instagram at Style Never Dies. And those are ways you can keep up with me.
What's the last one?
On Instagram at Style Never Dies.
Right on. Now, we do have 5 minutes left, so I thought it'd be fun for you to tell me about you and Ray. How the two, because that was one of the, honestly, that blew my mind at the end after we did the march and all that stuff, and I was like, wait, you know Ray, who I've been working with for 5 years? So how do you two know each other? Go tell me your background.
So I actually met Ray at a bus stop. You were probably coming from your job, yes? Yeah.
And I just told you that.
It was very hot, but of course I'm friendly. So I was like, oh, hey, come on, sit down and talk to me until the bus gets here. And then I seen Ray again actually at a Chester County Stands Up meeting.
I didn't know you were part of that, Ray.
Yeah, a lot of what I do involving Coatesville involves a lot of community uplifting and a lot of like social engineering geared towards financial literacy and political advancement of the rural communities, the inner city communities. And I don't really like to talk a lot about the projects that I'm involved in until there's result-based things I can bring to the table. I'm accused a lot of being very wordsy. So I wanted to just stand pat and really observe and not overstep when it comes to something like this, because Chester County Stands Up is a very big deal. And the fact that I was even at that meeting at all was a great honor, and I didn't want to belittle it by like putting my ego at the fore. So there was a lot of me just being quiet, and that's not my strong suit. But yeah, like being able to approach an idea and being able to go back and forth on an intellectual level, it gave me assurances internally that Coatesville would be in good hands should she decide to run. And when I found out that she won the seat, I was like, it's a long time coming.
And Ray also tells me that you're one of us. You also watch anime and read comics and stuff like that.
I am.
So what are you? So because we have like 3 minutes left, what are you watching right now? What are you like getting into?
So actually, right now I've been playing Sims because I installed the university pack, so I had to like make sure my Sims get married, have a kid. I'm gonna raise this kid and send it to a university. So that is what I'm doing right now. I just recently rewatched Pokemon, and I'm probably gonna rewatch The Last Airbender because it's on Netflix. But if anybody, well, actually, I can maybe ask this later.
So yeah, again, Nydea, you are great. You are always welcome back. We'd love to have you back. This is, I really don't want this to be like a very special episode. I want this to be like the beginning of a long-term conversation that we continue to have moving forward. So, cool. Maybe next time we'll bring you back and we'll talk, when Cowboy Bebop comes out on Netflix, we'll bring you back.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen that on Hulu too. So definitely. And I would love for you guys to help me rebuild my Kalia deck because my Magic cards are all over the place. And
I can help you. I can help you out with that. I can. We may be doing a Magic the Gathering Arena League locally.
Oh, that's
it's a free to play Magic the Gathering game.
Okay.
And because I don't know, my philosophy is like, look, I know now we're in green and we can, go out on the weekends, but not everyone wants to. And so like maybe we should create some social events that we can do online that like free to play games that anyone could download and like have like game nights on Saturday nights and stuff like that.
Right, because you can play Magic the Gathering on the computer. I feel like I've done it before.
Oh yeah, and it's coming out on it's finally coming out on Mac, so pretty excited for that.
Dope.
But all right, that's another conversation for another time. Thank you so much, Nydea. I really appreciate you coming out. It's been fantastic getting to know you, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes. Keep up the good work.
Yes. Thanks so much, Ray. Thanks so much, Kyle.
All right, so that brings us to the end of the show. Like I said, this isn't going to be a one-off topic. We are going to continue this conversation. I think I've said this a lot. We read comic books, we play video games, we watch movies about these heroes who stand up in times of darkness and stand up against adversity. And, that's really happening in our country right now. So I think we'd be really doing our viewers and listeners a disservice by not highlighting these issues, and we're going to keep on doing that. So we hope you continue listening and watching, and to that end, we should probably mention a couple things. We are now on YouTube, so you can still find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, all that fun stuff. But if you're listening to us there, you can watch us on YouTube. We are now video recording these, so please follow us there. Like and subscribe, all that fun stuff. Also, you can find our website, www.worldsfinestshow.com. We're also at World's Finest Pod on Twitter and World's Finest Show on Facebook.
Get outside, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, find out what's actually happening in the city, the town, the borough, the area space around you, and then be involved. Nothing will change if you sit on the couch and don't do a thing.
Yes, and I understand there is disease out there. You know, the COVID-19 is still out there. So if you don't feel safe, there are other ways to get involved. Nydea mentioned a few, but feel free, send us a message. Either you can send us an email at worldsfinestshow@gmail.com. You know, we want to have these conversations. So we have resources, we know people. So if you want to get involved, send us a message. We'll point you in the right direction. But thank you so much for tuning in. We really do this all for you. The show's been made possible by electricity and brought to you by
light.
So that's it. Thank you for tuning in. We will be back next week. But until then,
keep geek.
Woo!
World's Finest Show. The World's Finest Show. The World's Finest Show.